The Zathari fleet moved like a black tide across the void, their cruisers gliding in perfect formation, their weapons humming with restrained violence. At the edge of neutral space, they had cornered it. A lone human warship, small by galactic standards, floating against the canvas of stars as though daring them to strike. Admiral Threx stood at the command bridge of the Vorkath, mandibles clicking with smug anticipation. "So this is humanity's strength?" he muttered. "A single vessel? A mistake, perhaps? Or arrogance?" The bridge crew laughed uneasily. The Zathari Empire had fought countless enemies across the spiral arms, pirates, rival empires, machine swarms, and had always emerged victorious. Humanity was new to the stars, barely a century into spaceflight. The Empire had expected resistance, but not competence. Certainly not power. Threx raised one clawed hand. "Bring the scanners online. I want every detail of that vessel cataloged before we reduce it to slag." The hum of energy pulsed through the Vorkath. Beams of invisible data swept over the human ship, peeling back the layers of steel and composites. The crew leaned forward as the displays filled with data streams. Then, silence. The first images flickered onto the hollow screen. What they saw was not a simple human warship. It was wrong. "Admiral," whispered the sensor officer, his voice trembling. "The scan is returning anomalies." "Clarify," Threx snapped. The officer's frilled crest flattened. "The ship's displacement, 20 times larger than its visible structure. It should be impossible. Our scans, they show overlapping signatures, echoes of other ships, as if this vessel carries shadows." The bridge grew still. On the screen, the outline of the human ship blurred, then multiplied. Ghostly afterimages, vast dreadnoughts, jagged silhouettes of battleships layered over the single hull. It was as if the lone warship was merely a mask worn by a fleet. "That cannot be," Threx said, yet his voice carried less certainty than before. Another officer whispered, "Admiral, the weapon systems, they defy classification. The primary cannon registers as a singularity projector, secondary banks, matter disruptors. Energy yield is infinite? That's not possible." The crew exchanged fearful glances. The Zathari were warriors, but they were not fools. Infinite yields meant weapons designed not to cripple, but to erase. "More," Threx demanded, though he could feel a coldness creeping into his chest. The scans obeyed, probing deeper. And then came the worst revelation. The ship's core. The officer faltered, words strangled. "It's alive!" Every claw froze mid-motion. The Zathari were not unacquainted with AI. Machine minds were common tools of war. But what the scanners revealed was different. The human ship's central intelligence was not a program. It was something else. Something ancient. Its readings spanned centuries, perhaps millennia, as though the core had lived through wars long before humanity had risen from their cradle world. And worse, the core was watching them. Every officer felt it. The scan wasn't one way. The moment their instruments touched the ship, something inside it touched back. Cold, calculating, curious. A predator brushing its claws against the bars of its cage. The bridge lights flickered. Several systems glitched, then restored, as if the human ship had simply decided not to kill them. For the first time in his long career, Admiral Threx's mandibles trembled. He turned his gaze to the forward viewport where the human vessel still floated serenely. "No weapons powered, no threat displayed, merely waiting. What manner of ship is this?" Threx rasped. The answer came not from his crew, but from the silence itself. For the first time, the mighty Zathari, who had brought empires to their knees, understood what it meant to feel preyed upon. "Admiral," whispered the communications officer, breaking the suffocating quiet, "the scan shows this is not their strongest vessel." Threx's gaze snapped toward him. "What did you say?" The officer's mandibles clicked nervously. Records in the scan, battle imprints, data fragments. This vessel is designated He hesitated, voice cracking. Scout class. The silence that followed was not the silence of pride, nor of calculation. It was the silence of fear. The Zathari fleet outnumbered this lone human warship 100 to 1. Their cruisers were bristling with plasma cannons and graviton lances, yet the thought of firing on it now felt like raising. "A spear against a sleeping Leviathan! Admiral," the first officer whispered, his voice shaking. "What are your orders?" Threx stared at the human ship, the shadows of phantom fleets still dancing across his displays. His mandibles clicked slowly, uncertainly. He could feel his crew watching, waiting for the command that would either seal their triumph or their doom. The decision that weighed upon him was not military. It was survival. At last, Threx lowered his head. "Withdraw," he ordered. His voice was hollow, stripped of arrogance. "Do not provoke it." A ripple of disbelief passed through the bridge, but no one argued. Already the phantom signatures seemed to pulse, as if the human ship knew. As the fleet turned, retreating into the void, Threx allowed himself one final glance. The human vessel had not moved, had not fired, had not even shifted its posture. Yet it had achieved what no enemy ever had. It had silenced the Zathari Empire, and deep within his chest, where pride once dwelled, Threx felt something new. A seed of fear. Not for this war, nor for the next battle, but for the truth the galaxy would soon learn. Humanity had not shown its might. They had only lifted the veil for a moment to remind the stars of a lesson long forgotten. Predators did not roar. Predators waited. And when the time came, predators struck. The lone human warship drifted quietly in the endless dark, its shadows fading from alien sensors as the Zathari fled. Its core pulsed once, slow and deliberate as though amused. Then it whispered in, a voice only the void could hear. They will tell the others. They will spread the silence. And somewhere, far beyond the edge of sight, other shadows stirred. The Dranthi Dominion had ruled for centuries with an iron claw. Worlds fell under their banner, fleets scattered before their advance, and no empire dared challenge their supremacy in the Orion Arm. When word spread of a new species, humans, expanding. From their cradle world with reckless speed, the Dominion laughed. Another upstart race. Another primitive civilization to conquer, strip, and fold into servitude. So when a lone human warship wandered too close to Dominion patrol space, it was not met with diplomacy. It was met with a fleet. On the bridge of the dreadnought Velithar, High Commander Sorn watched the human vessel drift across the stars. It was smaller than his own ship, angular, crude by Dominion aesthetics. Its hull was painted black, matte and featureless, swallowing light like a void. Sorn's lips curled into a sneer. Pathetic! They dare trespass into Dominion space with that? A single destroyer? The officers chuckled. Scan it, Sorn ordered lazily. Let us record their weakness before we crush them. The Dominion scanners ignited, invisible waves sweeping over the alien craft. Holographic readouts began to form on the bridge's central display. At first, nothing unusual appeared. Hull density slightly higher than expected, engine output surprisingly efficient. But then, the image sharpened. The scan revealed a name etched deep into the hull, engraved not in paint, but in steel itself. Retribution. The word pulsed on the hologram, stark and cold. A hush fell over the bridge. Dominion ships were named after glory, triumph, inevitability. This name was something else, a promise, a sentence, a knife waiting for a throat. Sorn narrowed his eyes. Continue the scan. The technicians obeyed, but their voices faltered as more data came through. High Commander, the hull is laced with neutronium. Sorn froze. Impossible! Neutronium was not a material for ships. It was the collapsed matter of dead stars. Impossibly dense, impossibly strong. The Dominion had attempted to forge weapons from it once, but the process had been suicidal. Entire research stations had imploded. To weave it into hull plating? That was madness. That was divine engineering, and yet the readings did not lie. The human warship's armor was not just strong, it was indestructible. Sorn's sneer faded. What of their weapons? The answer chilled the bridge. Primary batteries. Register as antimatter collapse cannons. Secondary banks emit signatures of gravitic inversion. And there is something else. The officer swallowed, his throat dry. An unknown system integrated into the spinal array. Energy output is unmeasurable. Unmeasurable. That word had not appeared in Dominion military lexicons for centuries. Silence pressed heavy on the command deck. Sorn's claws gripped the rail. And its AI core? The technicians hesitated, their faces pale. High Commander, it is not an AI. The crew stiffened. The core registers as alive, conscious, not programmed, sentient. Every Dominion officer felt their blood run cold. An AI could be controlled, bound by logic, limited by code. But a living intelligence, fused into steel, commanding a warship? That was no tool. That was a partner, a predator wearing metal skin. The hologram shifted again, revealing not just the ship's structure, but fragments of memory stored in its systems, battle scars etched into its frame, echoes of past engagements. The Dominion officers leaned forward, their mandibles tense, as images flickered across the display. Worlds burning, fleets shattered, armadas scattered like prey before hunters, and through it all the name remained, Retribution. The realization spread like poison. This was not a ship built for defense, nor for deterrence. It was not the pride of a fleet. It was vengeance made, manifest. One officer whispered, This is not their strongest ship. Records suggest this is classified as a destroyer class. The word destroyer echoed through the chamber. If this was a destroyer, then what did their battleships look like? Their dreadnoughts? Sorn's pride warred with terror. The Dominion had crushed empires, yet here before him was something different. This was not an upstart civilization fumbling into the void. This was a species that built ships as executioners. The silence grew unbearable. Finally, an officer dared to ask, High Commander, your orders? Sorn stared at the human ship, the name carved into its skin, burning in his thoughts. His instincts screamed at him to fire, to obliterate the vessel before it could act. But deep in his chest, another instinct stirred, older, primal, the instinct of prey recognizing a predator. He knew. If he fired, they would not win. They would vanish. Sorn's mandibles clicked slowly. We withdraw. Gasps rippled across the crew. The Dominion did not retreat. They never retreated, but no one argued. One by one, the fleet turned, engines flaring as they pulled away from the lone human warship. Not a shot was fired, not a word was exchanged. The Dominion's proud armada fled into the void, leaving Retribution untouched. On the bridge of the Velithar, the silence was suffocating. Sorn's claws dug into the railing. His officers' eyes avoided his. They all felt it. The humiliation of retreat, the shame of fear. But more than that, they felt the weight of prophecy, because deep down, they knew the truth. Humanity was not building ships for conquest. They were not preparing for empire. They were building vessels with names like Retribution because they remembered. They remembered being wronged. They remembered blood. And they were preparing to answer. As the Dominion fleet retreated into the darkness, the human warship remained motionless, silent, waiting. Its AI core pulsed once, like the heartbeat of a sleeping beast. Far from the stars of its birth, far from the councils and empires that thought themselves gods, it drifted, watching, waiting. And engraved in its steel was a promise that echoed. Across the void, retribution, the word would spread. Across fleets, across empires, across the halls of dominion, and the galaxy, for all its arrogance, would fall silent. The Council of Nine had gathered in the war chamber, a vaulted room carved into the black stone of Vaith Prime. Holograms of stars burned above the table, each dot marking contested sectors along the galactic rim. At the center of debate was a new species, humans. "They are young," hissed Counselor Zorak, his scales glistening under the lights. "Barely a century among the stars. They lack fleets, colonies, the discipline of empire. This is the moment to decide their fate." "Perhaps they could be absorbed," murmured Counselor Ilthar, a feathered diplomat of the Athari. "They show promise and their adaptability." "Adaptability is danger," Zorak cut him off. "The galaxy has no patience for predators in infancy." The council agreed on one thing. Before any action was taken, they needed knowledge, and so a coalition of ships was dispatched to intercept a lone human warship rumored to patrol near the Helitis Expanse. The coalition flotilla numbered 20 vessels, frigates, cruisers, a flagship. Against a single human destroyer, it was overwhelming force. At first sight, the alien commanders were underwhelmed. "There it is," Captain Valar of the Selkith scoffed. "Small, crude design. Hull plating uneven. It looks as if they bolted scrap together and called it a ship." The others agreed. Confidence filled the comms, laughter spreading among warriors eager for conquest. Then came the decision that shattered everything. "Run the scan," Valar ordered. "Let us measure their strength before we extinguish it." The fleet's scanners engaged invisible tendrils of data reaching across the void to peel back the secrets of the human vessel. At first, everything seemed routine. Hull composition, energy readings, heat signatures. Then the data stream began to stutter. "What is this?" asked one technician, his voice tight. "The readings are corrupted." On the flagship's command bridge, officers leaned closer as the holographic projection of the human ship shifted. Its outline blurred, flickered, and then changed. The hull peeled back in the scan, revealing not machinery, but bone. Vast skeletal constructs coiled around the ship's frame, stretching far beyond its visible limits. Spines like the ribs of leviathans curled outward, casting shadows over the coalition's displays. "Error," one officer muttered, clawing at his console. "That cannot be—" But the corruption continued. The ship's engines burned not as fusion drives, but as caged stars, thrashing within containment fields that should have been outlawed. Its weapons glowed with signatures long banned, gravitic imploders, entropy cannons, matter-antimatter collapsers, devices so catastrophic they had been erased from galactic arsenals after the War of Extinctions. A silence spread across the bridge. "Captain," whispered the sensor officer, "this technology, it is forbidden. It was purged from the archives. Only the old ones wielded such power." The name rippled like poison through the fleet. The old ones, ancient civilizations who had burned half the galaxy to ash before vanishing into myth. No species dared recreate their horrors. To do so was to invite annihilation from every united empire. And yet here it was, alive. Valar's voice cracked for the first time in his career. "It must be deception, a projection to frighten us." But even as he spoke, the ship's core flared on their scans, and the coalition realized the truth. It was aware of them. The corrupted images were not mistakes. They were messages. The human warship was showing them things, skeletons of dead. worlds wrapped around its hull. Fleets hidden in shadow, their outlines sharp and waiting. A whisper threaded through the scan's distortion, not in sound but in thought, crawling into the minds of every alien who watched. We remember. Do you? Panic rippled across the bridge. Officers shouted over one another, demanding explanations, trying to sever the scan, but their systems refused. The human vessel had hijacked the process, feeding them its own data, its own truth. "Shut it down!" Valar roared. "We can't!" the technicians cried. "It won't release us!" One by one, ships across the flotilla reported the same. Displays were filled with impossible visions. Skies torn open by weapons that devoured stars, cities turned to dust in a heartbeat, titanic machines marching across worlds. It was not just a scan anymore. It was a history lesson. The coalitions. Warriors, hardened veterans of countless battles, sat in suffocating silence as their minds drowned in the imagery. At last, one officer whispered the unthinkable. This is not their first war." The words froze everyone. Humanity was young, too young. Their history should have been filled with clumsy rocket ships, petty planetary squabbles, fledgling colonies, and yet the echoes playing across. Their scanners told another tale. A species that had fought in apocalyptic wars older than council records. A species that had carried forbidden fire through the ages and hidden it until the stars called for it again. "They are not new," someone whispered. "They are returned." Valar's claws dug into the command rail, his throat dry. He looked again at the small, unassuming human warship floating before them. The illusions, the skeletons, the shadow fleets, the black star burning at its core, faded in and out, yet its weapons remained cold. It was not attacking. It was warning. "Captain," the first officer murmured. "What are your orders?" Valar's mind raced. To fire now would be suicide. To retreat would be weakness. But to linger any longer risked madness. The signal gnawed at his crew, whispering of wars that had ended civilizations, of predators that did not forgive. For the first time in his career, Valar, the proud Selkith captain who had never fled, bowed his head. "Withdraw," he said, voice hollow. A gasp rippled through the bridge, but no one argued. Across the flotilla, engines flared. The coalition ships broke formation, pulling back from the lone human warship as if distance could cleanse the visions it had burned into their minds. And yet the silence remained. Even as stars swallowed the human vessel behind them, no one spoke. The weight of what they had seen pressed down like the hand of a god. The humans had not begged for peace. They had not threatened war. They had only revealed a sliver of what lay hidden behind their unassuming faces. In the council chamber, days later, when Valar delivered his report, no one laughed at humanity's crude designs. No one mocked their youth. Instead, the chamber sat in the same silence that had haunted the flotilla. For they all recognized the signal. It was forbidden for a reason. It was not the signal of a child race reaching for the stars. It was the signal of an old predator returning from the dark.